Hello, it's April already. I'm joined by Absolute's resident expert on all things Patch Tuesday, Rob Brown, for our monthly update. Following some feedback we've had from regular viewers, we are changing up the style of these sessions to more of a video podcast format moving forwards. So, no need to worry about signing up to webinars or signing in on the day. All you need to do is like and subscribe to the Absolute YouTube channel. Well, Rob, it seems, my friend, there's no slowing up this month, and you have another bumper crop of CVEs to share with us. Tell me more.
Thanks, Justine, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us today on this new format. We're delighted to continue the series of Patch Tuesday content, slightly in a new format, but we do hope that this is extremely valuable. For it, you know, this time last year when I looked at the April Patch Tuesday exactly 1 year ago, we've actually had this year a significant increase in vulnerabilities year on year. And I actually remembered that we're actually a third of the way through the year already. But before we get into Patch Tuesday, we're going to talk about something that is equally as important, and that's the life cycle of the Microsoft operating system. And we're going to continue talking about this because in October of this year, the Windows 10 Enterprise operating system will actually go end of life. End of life means you will no longer have support for the operating system, but more importantly, you won't be able to do any patching. So it's really, really important that you move from Windows 10 to Windows 11 as soon as possible. We are aware that Windows 12 is likely to be released later this year, officially, about the time that Windows 10 goes end of life. But the Windows 10 to Windows 11 migration for this operating system migration isn't as simple as deploying a patch or deploying a feature update. There are significant hardware requirements for the Windows 11 operating system that you might need to plan for, such as the hard disk, minimum CPUs, and certain TPM chip requirements. So please don't leave this to the last minute. Start your Windows 10 to Windows 11 migration as early as possible. Once you get to Windows 11, you'll have support probably all the way until 2030. Even though you go to Windows 11, you still have to be aware there are life cycles for the feature updates. So Windows 11 22H2 will actually go end of life in October of this year as well. So we highly recommend all Windows 11 customers going to 23H2 as soon as possible, or recommended 24H2, which we have fully tested. Now, if you are using Windows 10 long-term servicing, you actually have an extended life cycle till about 2030, I believe. So you don't really have to worry about it. Unfortunately, that long-term servicing offer is no longer available. You can't actually purchase that from Microsoft. So if you have already purchased it, you can continue to use it. But if you haven't already got it, you have to go with Windows 11 or Windows 12 later on this year. And we have a first of the most interesting vulnerabilities I think I saw this Patch Tuesday was marked as a vulnerability, but they haven't provided a fix for it. And they haven't actually explained what the vulnerability is, which is this year the first time this has happened. There is an update for Microsoft System Center. Now, Microsoft System Center is the Microsoft platform on-premise tools that allow you to both manage devices and perform patch management. It also includes products for Operations Manager, Service Manager, Orchestrator, Data Protection Manager, and Virtual Machine Manager. Now, they have said there's a vulnerability with System Center, although that vulnerability is in a very strange place. It's an elevation of privilege vulnerability, meaning that if you can exploit it, you're able to elevate your permissions, of which maybe you could get access to system privileges. It's been marked as important severity by Microsoft and independently verified as 7.8 on their CVSS score. Now, the vulnerability is actually in the installation media of System Center. And what Microsoft is saying is that there is a vulnerability in the installation media, that they are not going to provide a patch for, but they are recommending that you download the System Center installation media from Microsoft and delete any local copies that you have. Very, very interesting. I've not heard of a vulnerability like this before. Perhaps something in that original download media has a vulnerability inside of it, and maybe they're changing it. But what is really interesting is no versions of System Center are being changed in this patch. So you don't actually know if anything in your organization is susceptible to this kind of exploit. Nonetheless, if you have placed your System Center files on your network share or you have a local copy, go ahead and delete all of those versions of the installation media, re-download it from Microsoft Fresh, and you apparently will be safer instead of using old installation media. Of course, because System Center is a premise product, not like Intune, which is the cloud product, you might be still installing certain elements of the System Center from those old installation medias. So let's follow the recommendations and go ahead and re-download the media from Microsoft, place us on your network share, and use those going forward. Now, switching back to Patch Tuesday, we had 120 fixes. This is almost twice as many as we had last month. 6 of those were marked as critical. 114 were marked as important severity. 12 are more likely to be weaponized in this release. That is higher than last month as well. One of those is weaponized. We're going to talk a lot about that today. None of the patches that are none of the patches that fix a vulnerability this month are marked as public aware, but we do have a jump point. And I like to pay close attention to jump points because it's a specific kind of vulnerability that is tracked at the CVSS level. So within the CVSS, they call it a scope change. If there is a scope change, it means that if you can exploit the vulnerability, you can effectively hop out of that original attack vector. So, for example, if you were able to break out of the operating system, you could move into a service, or if you were attacking a hypervisor host, you could jump out and into a guest operating system. And of course, those lateral expansion attacks are extremely difficult to track. So any particular vulnerability that has a scope or a jump point, as we call it, I would highly recommend that you deploy anyway, regardless of its severity. So if it does have a jump point, do make sure that is included in the first wave of patch deployments that keep your environment safe. Now we have a leaderboard also. The leaderboard is the bug types that are actually fixed. This is super interesting because we have a new leader this month. So elevation of privilege vulnerabilities actually was second place all of this year, and suddenly it's taken a big leap. Elevation of privileges, 48 fixes in this release. That is a threat actor that gains access to an employee's account, bypasses the proper authorization channel, and successfully grants themselves access to data they're not supposed to have. And of course, that's very, very serious if you can do that. So you're able to elevate yourself to system privileges, at which point you can spread ransomware super easily. Remote code execution, I believe, is the most serious kind of bug type. There are 33 fixes. That's a class of cyber attack in which attackers remotely execute commands to place malware or other malicious code on your computer or network. And so I highly recommend, of all of the vulnerabilities that you should be fixing in any cycle, if you are prioritizing those patches, then remote code execution should be in the first wave of patch deployment. The next two have 14 fixes each. That's information disclosure. That's an information disclosure vulnerability occurs when a system unintentionally reveals sensitive information to unauthorized users. This is very popular when trying to read memory or CPU data, such as reading passwords in clear text, followed by denial of service. Again, 14 fixes. That's a type of security weakness in the system or an application or a service that can be exploited to make the system unavailable to its intended users. It typically involves overwhelming the target with traffic or requests or exploiting a bug to crash or freeze the device. Obviously, those are the kind of vulnerabilities that can impact IT significantly. If you simply want to stop a service from working or a server from working without actually without actually causing any attack per se, it is of great importance for IT management to keep your servers up as long as possible and as secure as possible. That is very, very serious. So denial of service is one of those vulnerabilities I like to keep an eye on and include in either the first or second wave of remediation. Security feature bypass, we have 9 fixes. That's a security feature bypass, allows an attacker to bypass a security mechanism without disabling it, effectively rendering it useless. So for example, you're supposed to not have access to certain files, that you're actually able to bypass that without anyone knowing. Very, very serious as well. Followed lastly by spoofing. That refers to an attacker pretending to be someone or something else to gain unauthorized access, deceive a system, or trick users. We had 2 of those. So if you are using bug types inside your patching strategy, I would highly recommend in phase 1 to always include remote code execution. This month, I would also include elevation of privilege. And then if you have to, use denial of service as a third selection criteria. Now, if you are an absolute customer, then we do have a recommended patch risk profile, and it uses all of the elements of data which is available to you in your console. There are 6 areas that I believe you can use to build your risk profile, and that can help you to strategically select the patches that cover the most risk, especially if you are not able to deploy all of your patches at once. And we have lots and lots of customers over large populations all over the world that simply cannot deploy everything all at the same time. So what they can do is they can group certain vulnerabilities into risk categories, and then they can deploy those to get the risk down as much as possible over several weeks. Now, the risk starts always with the vendor severity. The vendor severity is typically critical, high, is also known as important, medium, low, and NA. Obviously, critical being the most serious and NA being the least serious. We also are able to collect the CVSS score. Now, the CVSS score is a calculation out of 10 that is actually calculated by both the vendor and an independent organization that verifies the accuracy of that calculation. And they can actually scale a vulnerability slightly differently to the vendor. So when you combine the CVSS score and the vendor severity together, and you say anything that is critical from the vendor or anything that is critical on a CVSS score, you are able to cover your bases and to make sure that the highest risk ones are included in that first selection phase. Weaponized and public aware, these are states. It is the state of a vulnerability. In this case, it's if it has been exploited. So weaponized means through our partnership with our vendors, we have got evidence that a vulnerability, a CVE, has been exploited using a particular CVE, and that marks it as weaponized true. Now, when a vulnerability is weaponized, it means it's under active attack and could perhaps elevate its importance within your patching strategy to deploy that more urgently. In fact, some of our customers are using weaponized vulnerabilities as an auto deployment. So anything that becomes weaponized doesn't have to follow a human approval process. It can be automatically deployed through automation to keep your environment as safe as possible. And it's up to date within 4 hours. So from weaponization, tracking, and then deployment can be as little as 4 hours. Public aware is very similar to weaponization, but it means it hasn't necessarily got an active attack. In fact, what sometimes happens is the attackers, or whether that is through a bug bounty program or white hat hackers, they can actually publish the exact steps that can be followed to exploit a vulnerability. And they let the vendors know that they found a vulnerability, and they give them a specific deadline in which to provide a patch. And if the vendor feels that it's important enough, they will release a patch and give the kudos to that organization or that person. But if the vendor doesn't, then what can happen from time to time is the exact steps to exploit that vulnerability can be published. And more recently, we found YouTube as the mechanism for sharing how a particular exploit can be achieved. And I certainly wouldn't want to be an IT admin or an IT manager that knew that there were vulnerabilities that had a public aware vulnerability or that blueprint, perhaps maybe not weaponized yet. But if you know exactly how to weaponize something, then the chances are it could very well become weaponized. Doesn't always mean that it becomes, but there's a chance that it could. So we'd like to factor in the public awareness of that vulnerability in our decision. We think that something that becomes public aware could be, if not in phase one of your deployment, but certainly in phase two. So once you've got the most serious weaponized threats out, maybe public aware comes right afterwards. If you have something that's weaponized and public aware, you have a perfect storm, and that's where the automation that you build into your patching strategy can just automatically deploy that patch to keep your environment safe. Now, to balance the risk a little bit, we have something called a countermeasure. A countermeasure recommended by the vendor is a mitigation or a workaround. So you might be mitigated if you had a particular version of the software that wasn't runnable, or perhaps you had the next generation antivirus that was securing your devices, which meant you didn't need to as urgently deploy the patch. And you might have workarounds where you might be able to implement registry keys or make changes to the software or the applications or the Windows itself that actually can bypass that vulnerability, and therefore you have a countermeasure. Now, imagine each of the patches that we're trying to deploy can be anywhere from one. I've seen it actually some patches as high as 2 GB in size. Some of these cumulative updates are extremely large. Being able to very quickly deploy that to all of your devices could take days, perhaps weeks, perhaps many weeks. And so changing a registry key on your PC may be far quicker, especially if you have automation tools like what we have in Absolute. You can go ahead and make those registry changes really, really quickly, and that mitigates the need to as urgently deploy the patch. And lastly, to come full circle, we have the exposure. Everything that you are selecting, from the vendor severity to the CVSS score to the weaponization, should be balanced against the exposure of that risk. If you have some high CVSS scores, some weaponizations on 2% of your devices, or maybe even 100 machines, but you have a weaponized threat that is medium severity on 95% of your devices, that should probably be the first wave of patch deployment, because that's what you're actually exposed the most to a higher risk when you take all of those factors together. So this risk factor is what we recommend at Absolute, and all of these elements are within your console, helping you make the right decision. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop across to our website and we're going to just follow on some recommendations of what came out yesterday. So if you come over to our absolute.com website, we have some fantastic resources up here on how to be resilient, from patching strategies to technology that really can help you and empower your IT departments to protect and secure your environment, along with the blog posts where we'll be placing all of these videos that we make, as well as our YouTube page. And if you follow this blog post link, you'll actually find your way over to the Patch Tuesday article. Now, Patch Tuesday, as we said, had an extreme high number of fixes, 120 fixes in total, covered pretty much everything from Windows components, Microsoft Office, Visual Studio, Windows Defender. What's really interesting is that from month to month, I like to track the risk, the average risk of one Patch Tuesday to another, because it gives me an idea about what Microsoft is doing, how many vulnerabilities they found, where they're going, and to what their priorities are. And if you take all of the vulnerabilities that were fixed yesterday, and you take all of the CVEs and all of the CVSS scores for those CVEs, we come up to 894, which is almost 900 total CVSS score. If you compare it to last month, the average in this Patch Tuesday release is actually slightly higher. So although we had more updates this month than we had last month, the average severity of them in this month is higher than last month. And so we have a lot of vulnerabilities that we have to pay attention to and obviously do the testing to ensure that our environment is safe. The average this month is 7.5 out of 10. 7.5 out of 10 is extremely high. Now, I've chosen three particular vulnerabilities that I want you to be aware of. Specifically, these ones, I think, from the factors that we talked about, are actually the sort of the more important ones that I would recommend. But we also have a link to our download sheet, which you can actually access today, that actually gives you all of the vulnerabilities using that same calculation. So as we go through, you'll see all of the vulnerabilities that are at the top. All you have to do is work out your exposure and remediate in that order. Starting with CVE 2025 29824. This is the common log file system driver elevation of privilege vulnerability. Now, this has been in Patch Tuesday now probably 4 or 5 months in a row, and it is still weaponized. It's under active attack. I guess they just haven't been able to fix this vulnerability permanently. There's another fix for it. Now, a local attacker can exploit a flaw in the CLFS driver to gain system level privileges, potentially leading to full system compromise. This is a CVSS score of 7.8. Its attack vector is local, meaning they do need to get access to your network. It has low privileges, no user interaction at all, and low complexity. Now, we do have a suggestion that if perhaps you want to bypass this vulnerability, then you can actually disable the CLFS on your devices. This may impact your logging functionality. However, this is actually vulnerable on Windows 10, Windows 11, Server 2016, 19, Server 2022. So pretty much everything is vulnerable. If you're actually not using this this service, perhaps you could turn it off. At least turn it off, allowing you time to remediate the vulnerability. Then go ahead and turn it back on. My second recommendation is CVE 2025 29794. This is a SharePoint server remote code execution vulnerability. Now, this is not weaponized yet, but it does have critical risk. And now an authenticated user with site owner privileges can execute arbitrary code on the SharePoint server, potentially gaining full server control. So that remote code execution is what could be used in cyber attacks. It has a CVSS score of 8.8, which is the highest CVSS score for this release, and it has a vendor severity of critical. Now, its attack vector is network, which means any network, including the internet, could be an attack vector for this kind of exploit. So if you do in particular have SharePoint servers that have internet facing exposure, let's make sure that these get patched as soon as possible. Privileges required are low, no user interaction, and low complexity. It's kind of a perfect storm. Now, this is vulnerable on 2016, 2019, and subscription edition servers. Now, they suggest that perhaps you could restrict site owner permissions to minimize exposure whilst deploying this update. So perhaps this is a mitigation that you might consider using. However, that, how many users you do want to restrict your permissions to and not allowing you to create containers within SharePoint, it may be actually something that perhaps you just want to deploy the patch as quickly as possible. So you don't have to do that. And my last is a Windows telephony service remote code execution vulnerability. Again, this is not weaponized, but this is serious risk. That's CVE 2025-21205. Now, this is the Windows Telephony API, which allows unauthorized remote code execution, making it a low complexity attack vector. And the heap-based buffer overflow within the Windows Telephony service allows unauthorized attackers to execute code over a network. Now, you might not actually be using the Windows Telephony service on your systems, and perhaps if you were considering an operating system hardening project, you might consider turning this off. This can be turned off both in local group policy, domain group policy, or you can even use, if you want, something like PowerShell to go ahead and turn this off. But it is vulnerable on all Windows 10, Windows 11, and Server 2016 and onwards. So pretty much everything is exploitable. So extremely serious. Go ahead and implement operating system hardening, or go ahead and patch this one. Now, as we go through the rest of the Patch Tuesday release, there will be updates that you need to detect in your organization. If you're an absolute customer, that's brilliant. Go ahead and pop the CVE into 6sense and you can work out your exposure. If you're not a 6sense, an absolute 6sense customer, go ahead and use the download link to the chart here. This PDF is available to download, and you can basically put your exposure straight into the PDF document, allowing you to score each of these vulnerabilities from top to bottom. The score that we mentioned, the actual 6 elements of the score, takes everything into consideration except your exposure. We have some additional information here, such as what the attack vector could be. Be aware there are some countermeasures available. So where we do have recommended countermeasures, we put them in the countermeasure column. But this is a really useful way of sort of printing this off, taking it into one of your patch steering meetings where you can discuss these vulnerabilities in importance, and you can mark these ones are going to be released in phase 1, these ones will be released in phase 2. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope this was useful. If you do have any questions, please send those across to us. We use the YouTube question section, or actually message us directly, and one of our specialists will get back to you. We hope that's been really useful. And until May, wish you happy patching.
That's really great. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us. Have a good day, everyone.